Welcome to the Fit Drivers Podcast, sponsored by PrePass. Only PrePass provides weigh station, bypass, and integrated electronic toll payment services, saving you time, fuel, and money while improving safety and efficiency in trucking. Visit prepass.com for details. So listeners, one of the things that you really want to know is what makes Karen so unique is her husband is a professional truck driver. So she understands it and lives it every day, and not only through her research, but from her personal experience. And then I think, Karen, you have another new family member, right, that just started driving?
Yes, my stepson has been a driver for about 6 months.
Ah,
And so he has had a lot of adventures. And we just talked to him a few minutes ago. He's headed, eventually, he'll be in Wisconsin and then Massachusetts from there. So he's out there.
well, he is sure is lucky to have you as support to help him navigate and make sure he stays healthy out there on the road and what to look for. So, Karen, I want to get into talking about, as you and I both know, the latest numbers that came back from FMCSA that talk about driver health, right? Probably almost 55% of those drivers out there operating on short-term cards could be a 1 year or less. We lose approximately 300,000 drivers a year due to poor health. So based on your research and experience and so forth, do you see those numbers running pretty true?
I would think that those are accurate. And certainly, what we know is fitness for duty is so important to FMCSA, the companies, but it is a reflection of the actual health of the driver. And fitness for duty is not necessarily healthy, but it's the bare minimum standard. And so, if we have drivers out there who are not able to completely achieve the bare minimum standard, then we have drivers who really need a lot of help for the sake of their own health, but also to get them that lengthier DOT certification so that they can continue driving without interruption and continue serving their companies and our country.
If I remember correctly, one of your students or nurses you work with actually works and does DOTs every day, correct?
Actually, a couple of in this most recent class, we had like 3 or 4 students who do many, many DOT physicals every day. Yes.
Next, I wanted to ask you, do you think that we really do or can do more to educate our drivers on how to make better choices and how to live healthy out there, better education when they're coming in to the workforce? Do you think we could do a better job as an industry?
I absolutely think that. Now, of course, I haven't done a formal study on this, but anecdotally, what I know is that the new drivers, the new recruit drivers, receive just very bare, minimal, if any, instruction on maintaining their health while they're working. And certainly, we can do a lot better. I mean, given the technology that we now have available. Back when you and I first met many years ago, it was a little harder, but we have almost unlimited ability now to meet the needs of mobile and remote workers, which is what truck drivers basically are, through the use of our phones and our computers and so forth. So I think we have a huge group of workers who need a lot of education. My preference would be when they're in recruit school, when they're getting their training program, to get it introduced and then have regular follow-up messaging or whatever throughout, at different times during the week, just short bursts to remind them.
Right. And you and I have had many discussions about this, is that it has to really start in that orientation, right? When they're coming in, to really help them understand. And I always say that, with the newer population demographic coming in, we'd be doing these men and women a grave injustice if we didn't do a better job, because what we've learned from, we know in someone like you, your personal experience, your husband, the toll of driving long haul over the road, and it wears you out. And as I talk a lot, I have 2 brothers out there today, and man, I talk to them daily, and the stories I get, right, the things that they go through and face, and it's like you can't make some of these things up.
Right.
That they face out there. It's a tough job.
Yeah. And, just quickly, I wanted to say, too, I think that not only do the drivers benefit from getting that early introduction to the education, but the companies providing that for the recruits early on, that sends a message to them of concern and caring. And what we know from the research on job engagement and keeping people in jobs, it isn't so much salary, although salary is good, benefits are great, but it's having a voice and feeling like you're heard and feeling like you're cared for. And so the messaging of a company saying, hey, we're going to take some time out of this compress training because we believe you're worth us
Right.
investing in your health so that you can continue to be a good worker for us. That sends a very strong message.
And there's pretty good information, data research out there, right? That
Yes,
valid.
absolutely.
And I know from my experience talking to drivers, daily or at shows and so forth, it comes up quite often, and they just feel like that they're really not appreciated, right? And no one wants to take the time, and it does make a difference. You did some research on a program that was designed to coach drivers to help them navigate their way through. And my platform has always been about trying to help save the drivers we know today before we hire the next unknown drivers of tomorrow, right? And it's
Mhm.
always staying about, is it really driver shortage or is it retention, not retaining what we have and keeping them in the fold? So can you tell listeners about what you gleaned from that research?
Yes, well, the group studied a program that involved routine. The intention was routine monitoring of weight and blood pressure, along with coaching over the telephone. We started out. We looked at this program when it first started, and so our sample group was very small. But what we did find in that is that of the people who could improve, in other words, what we were looking at, what the outcome we were looking at was increasing length of DOT medical certification. That was what we were hoping for, is that somebody who started out with a 6-month card or a 1-year card would be able to move up to a 2-year card. So some of the people who signed up for the study already had the 2-year card, so there was no place for them to go. But of the people who could improve, 40% of them did. Now
Wow.
it was a small number, so
Sure.
don't we don't want to get too excited about that, but that shows us that those findings suggest that this could be very successful, but we need larger groups of truck drivers to be able to show that. What we also did was we took the program itself, and the students compared the guidance that was being given to the truck drivers to the national standard, what we call the evidence base, the best evidence for
Sure.
practice. And there was great alignment. So this program was very sound and solid, and it was based on the best research evidence at the time. So that, first of all, it was a sound program, and the methods that were being used, monitoring the blood pressure and then providing the coaching, did seem to have some effect in this very small group. But I will say that that does reflect what we know nationally in much larger studies about how health coaching works. That if you use like a multifaceted, multimodal approach, where you have, say, telephonic or text boost messages along with some instruction about how to do what you're trying to get people to do, that there can be great success with that. And that has been shown to be true specifically in truck drivers in a larger study that was conducted in Oregon a few years ago.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
but
I
stuff
got
like that, is fun to do.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So it reminded me because one of the things that I'm really trying to make happen, because we know that pre-trip is something that when you're training drivers, you're engraving their brain right to do. And I brought this up at CVTA, that why not take it just one step further when you're doing that? And simple as maybe just pulling off a tab of paper and say, hey, here's a list of recommended healthier snacks to do a pre-trip refrigerator check before you pull out on the road, right? Because in the life and the times of a driver, they're going to get stuck out there today somewhere. And if
Yeah,
they don't have a good choice to reach for, they make a bad one.
sure. And we stock a basket here with there's fruit and granola bars and stuff like that. Um, granola bars aren't the best, but they're better than other things. There's
Sure.
healthier choices or there's healthier versions of granola bars, but we try to have some fruit and some other things and some
Sure.
there's like these things you can get at Sam's Club that are mixed nuts and berries that we have in there for them to grab. We try to do some stuff like that, but I know, if we could adopt something where we could all have like meal prep or like something like Factor at our terminals, exercising is great and it's a good, that should be a give me, um, that we need to help our drivers with, because you can always walk around your truck and trailer no matter where you're at, no matter what's going on. Um, but helping them with food options, I think as we overcome this epidemic, which I think it is, because they don't have those good options out there, uh, we really need to help provide those for them. I really think something like Factor, they're becoming more popular. If we can get something like that in our terminals, either in a vending machine or if we can get a fridge full and provide it for them as a perk, they could take two or three on the road with them, things like that. Um, are really going to help move the needle because you know as well as I, Bob, is when you're eating good and feeling better, it's a lot easier to add the other habits on top of that, like drinking water and walking and,
Sure.
success begets success. So as you start doing one thing, it snowballs to others. So I think uh, it starts with the hardest part, and that's what you put in your mouth.
Man, I tell you, God, you couldn't said it any better than that, my friend. And I know you're a big believer in health and wellness, and I know I come from the fitness background, but I learned a long time ago it really is what you put in your mouth, right? There's no magic to it. What you put in your mouth and some movement. And in the trucking life, it's tough for the movement part to come in outside the basic things of walking. They really don't have the time. But if we can help them, just I tell all the time, just give me 50% of a better choice each time to make a small difference because that'll make a difference in their DOT regulations and so forth. And you led into my next question was you think that as an industry we can do more to educate our drivers. I know we spent a lot of time on, of course, talking about safety and go backwards and do all those things. But man, it doesn't mean anything if they can't keep their license, from their physical standpoint. And it sounds like that you're a big believer in that.
Absolutely. You start to see diabetes, blood pressure, blood sugar, all this stuff that plays a factor into it, and people getting 1 year passes because of it, and then sleep apnea machines in the truck, and all of that's due to weight gain and unhealthy habits out on the road. So I do think that we can. There's a big movement. You're a pioneer and at the forefront of that, and people like Dr. Mark McNamara and Jeremy Radner with Project 61, and um, there's some heavy steam coming, and some people that are pretty popular out there. All you guys doing and getting other people like me that just want to be a part of it. Um, we could really make some change. I think, I hear people doing more foods and stuff, and I really think if we could do something even even like that meal prep stuff at truck stops, maybe we can make a movement of that. It takes drivers to eat it, but heck, if they start buying it, they'll stock it. And so
Yeah.
awareness and availability are two things that we need to work on. However that happens, I don't know. But I think that's probably where we start.
Well, point was, in fact, Jeremy and I met yesterday and we're talking and about the whole position of that, and I tell him about a new project I'm working on, and hopefully have a fine tune here another by Women in Trucking. But I always felt like that, orientation meals, right, lunches, because coming at it from a standpoint of education, and I've talked to a lot of companies about orientation, they all always say, well, I just don't have enough time to put in a presentation, 30 minutes or an hour to talk about health. So I came up with this idea that we're going to be introducing. It's an orientation lunchbox, right, for the driver. It's a healthier box. And so they're already spending money for lunch, right? And so instead of buying them, stacks of pizza, providing one of these lunch boxes. And then inside the lunch box is a healthy sandwich, a protein bar, some fruit, different choices with education information, right? On
Awesome.
how you can
Yeah.
make the choice. And so you're already spending what, 8, $10, whatever it is. And so these are price point that all I'm asking is for them to 1 day a week, substitute it for one of these healthy boxes. And it's a start. And like you said, it all has to start somewhere and hopes it gains some traction. But like I said, at the end of the day, the driver's got to do it and eat it. But it's good. It's with a couple companies out of Omaha that have a good background, produce good food, good product, and hopefully that will make some impact, like you said, and start to spread the word.
Soda, if you swap out soda with water or even a diet soda, you're reducing calories there. So we have improved physical activity in our studies, particularly in the Tech4S study where we really went after physical activity. But it's an improvement in almost no physical activity to some physical activity. But even that is important movement. It's just so bad for our bodies to be in a sedentary sitting position for so long. And just brief periods of getting up, stretching, moving around, walking can benefit your cardiovascular system. I work with a person named Saurabh Thosar, and he studies sitting, and just short bouts of stretching and standing are good for you. We tend to think, oh, I've got to go walk for 20 minutes or 30 minutes. Well, get up for a couple of minutes or get out for 10 minutes and so on. A little bit of a tangent, but in terms of body weight management, we did have evidence for we didn't measure portions. There's surprisingly few really good measures of portion because we eat so many things and we drink so many things. It's hard to have a survey scale that measures portions. We're doing some research with photo food diaries now, where you can really, if the person's taking pictures of everything they eat, you can really get a sense for their total calories and nutrition composition. But I have a sense that it was probably food. We promote food substitutions, nutrient rich, lower calorie whole foods for calorie dense, processed foods, and serving swaps. If you've got a high calorie habit every day, maybe you can swap that out with something that's lower calorie, especially sodas and sugar loaded beverages. I do think our health coaches made a big difference. So the program is all mobile and you experience it online, but you've got a call with a health coach coming up, and you don't want to look bad to that coach. You talked to him before and you said, yeah, I'm going to get out and I'm going to walk at my midday 8-hour break. So I think having some social accountability to somebody you're going to talk to on the phone is helpful in our program as well. And I don't think I mentioned it, but the average benefit was about 1 unit of body mass index lost. It's like 7 or 8 pounds. It may not sound like a lot, but that's enough weight loss to reduce the risk of developing hypertension and diabetes.
So what was the time frame of this study? Was it 6 months, 12 months?
The program lasted 6 months, and then we followed up with them a year later. And that 1 year follow-up, the drivers who were able to keep the weight off, and I think this is a big finding, were the drivers who reported having a supportive supervisor at work. So most of the benefit went away on average, except for the people who said, I have a supportive supervisor at work. The supervisors weren't monitoring their body weight or asking them how it was going. It's just, you have a supportive workplace, I think you're less likely to backslide in response to some stressors. If you're stressed out, and your new health program might fall apart. And I just think if you have a supportive supervisor at work, you're going to navigate those stressors and hold it together a bit better.
Accountability. And was there any type of reward at the end of it? Did you award them with any kind of gifts, prizes?
Oh, in the program, yeah, we recognized everybody who participated at a high level. We called it shift certification. I think we offered them a choice of like an embroidered work jacket, with the logo, like a Carhartt style work jacket or something similar. And then it was a group challenge. And so the group that achieved the highest percentage of their goals. So it was really, did you achieve what you hoped you would achieve, not just the biggest weight loss? Those folks, we offered gift certificates where they could buy, exercise and health related gear and some money as well. So we recognize people for participating and for achieving, a high percentage of their goals.
Really appreciate that and certainly respect that, because that's what I found is first you got to make it accessible, right, for them. You got to give some education, the tools to work with, and then you need to reward them, right, if they do it. And a lot of mine that I've done was on the honor system, but if I could get them to send me a picture and I could see the change, and if they say, hey, I lost 50, but maybe in reality they lost 35, but they're moving. That's what I really wanted them to do. I wanted them to move, and I wanted them to take control of what they put in their mouth, right? And have some kind of accountability. And you're exactly right about, never tried to really train them into being, triathletes. I just wanted them to be able to have some sense of health and retire healthy, right? So that they could have some good quality time with their family. So one last question, it's probably the obvious one. In your experience, do you think that we do enough in our industry, commercial drivers, bus and truck drivers, to educate them well enough on how to live healthy on the road?
I definitely think we can do more. As we partnered with transit authorities in our newer project, Shift on Board, we worked with training departments to see, how much they were addressing health already when new people get hired. And I think pretty much every transit authority addressed health to some degree, sleep or healthy eating. But I don't think we fully alert people to the hazard of potential weight gain and drift into unhealthy eating because of the demands of the job. It's the job and the structure of the work that drives the health challenges. You put any human being into these jobs, it's going to be hard to stay healthy. It just is. So I think we can always do more. And with Shift on Board, we add 5 extra training sessions to their first year on the job, plus online challenges like the ones I've described earlier. And in our pilot study, we prevented about 7 pounds of weight gain relative to control and then reduced stress. It's really stressful being a new person. And this supportive program was meant to prevent weight gain and support health, but also support being a successful new employee. So I think my last comment is really every commercial driver deserves a tailored, effective health program or programs. Their job's really hard on their health, so they deserve those things. But it's really the lowest priority intervention. In occupational health, we want to change working conditions. And so I think I like to challenge employers to question, do I really need people to be working this many hours? Do I really need people to be working this many consecutive days? Can I give people a more predictable schedule so they can sleep more consistently from day to day?
Gosh, Doctor, thank you so much. As I said earlier before we jumped on, I've been really looking forward to this. I'm really very, very appreciative for you to come on and do this. The Fit Drivers podcast, of course, which is sponsored by PrePass, is to identify and really educate everybody on how bad the critical health is of professional drivers, their job duties out there and so forth. But before I get into my questions, take a few minutes and tell our listeners, Dr. Cyber, about the research that you do with the CDC.
Good morning, Bob. It's very much of a pleasure for me to talk with you, and particularly to talk about one of my favorite subjects, long-haul trucking and health and injury in that profession. I look forward to our discussion this morning. My research here at CDC has involved long-haul truck driver health and injury. What we did is we conducted a national survey in which we collected health and injury data from a nationally representative sample of long-haul truck drivers. From this data, we estimated how common certain health conditions, certain injuries, and risk factors were among long-haul truck drivers. We collected data from 1,600 long-haul truck drivers at 32 different truck stops across the lower 48 states. Some important findings resulted from this. First of all, we found out that both obesity and smoking were twice as likely among long-haul truck drivers compared to other adults working in the entire United States. And secondly, 61% of drivers said they had 2 or more of the following risk factors: hypertension, obesity, smoking, high cholesterol, little or no physical activity during the previous 7 days, and 6 or fewer hours of sleep per 24-hour period. Now, information such as this from our study also provided basic health and injury data for the Department of Transportation and the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration to guide development of their driver health and safety policy. Once we had completed our survey, we wanted to understand specifically what type of research was needed to be done in transportation. So we held a series of listening sessions with partners. Our partners included the FMCSA again, and representatives from industry, unions, associations, trade groups, academia, as well as consultants. During the sessions, we learned about concerns for health and well-being, how to adapt and use technologies such as smart devices to collect health data, and how best to share health information and appropriate training needed for transportation workers.
Well, very interesting. So it's a pretty in-depth figure or study. And I wanted to ask you, Doctor, so I get a lot of my data from the FMCSA, right? And also from the folks at the Virginia Tech Research Institute. And as they acknowledge, as you know, drivers get a 2-year card at the most. But what I try to get people to really understand in the midst of always talking about there's a driver shortage, that almost 58% of those card holders out there, those medical card holders, are operating on a 1-year or less medical card. Would you find that pretty adequate with your research that you've done, that there's obviously a large percentage of drivers out there, more than 50%, that are operating on a 1-year card or less?
Yes, a couple of things here. First of all, about that 50% figure, or 60%, I should say. This figure varies in different studies. 60% that figure has been relatively constant across different years with different studies. I further, Bob, went and looked at information from our survey where we calculated how common certain heart conditions, and I looked at, for certain conditions, how many individuals might be disqualified. There are 12 common disqualifying conditions I'll get into a little later. I considered actually conditions for diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, if the physician had mentioned that. And I did find results very similar to what the 1.5 million drivers with less than 1 year or less certification.
So we conducted a study called the Commercial Driver Safety Risk Factor Study with FMCSA to look at prevalence and risk of medical conditions in truck drivers, to really understand what is actually happening out there and what is the risk to drivers of those medical conditions. The conditions and health behaviors that we're seeing high rates of are tobacco use, obesity, irregular sleep patterns, tobacco use and obesity being comorbid health conditions with obstructive sleep apnea and elevated blood pressure. And then when it comes to crash risk, the study had really interesting findings, which is that certain medical conditions, when treated, were at no higher risk compared to drivers without these medical conditions, which to us points to the importance of treatment for these prevalent and risky medical conditions.
This was a study with over 21,000 commercial drivers, and data was collected between 2013 and 2016, and the report was published in 2020. We looked at risk factors, including demographic characteristics, medical conditions, personal attitudes, and work and environmental conditions, and then linked these factors with these drivers' driving records, especially the occurrence of crash or moving violations during that period of time. And a couple of highlights that I just want to point out, we found that 87% of the drivers in that sample were considered overweight or obese. So really high prevalence of overweight and obesity, which we know has kind of a trickle-down effect for a number of other different medical complications: sleep apnea, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, metabolic disease. What was interesting is when we looked at relationships between medical factors and crash risk, it wasn't the obesity that impacted crash risk. It was actually the untreated comorbid conditions that were related to obesity that had an impact on crash risk. So, for example, untreated sleep apnea, untreated hypertension, both of those, when untreated, increased crash risk significantly. However, when treated, when adequately and properly treated, those drivers with sleep apnea and with hypertension did not have crash risk above and beyond a healthy driver without the condition. So that was a really important finding, that it's not the obesity and the overweight that makes these drivers riskier on the roads. It's when they have these comorbid conditions that are left untreated. So we can quantify and identify these conditions and their implications for crash risk. But then what do we do with it, right? How do we implement meaningful and effective health programs for drivers? And I think one of the biggest challenges that I've seen in my decade plus in this industry is getting drivers involved and motivated and accountability to take these actions for themselves. We're seeing a lot more fleets get involved in these call to actions to implement these programs within their fleet, to give drivers all the tools to make them successful in owning their health and keeping themselves healthy, keeping themselves on the road, those on the roadway healthy, being there for their families. But really it boils down to the driver has to want to make those changes and wants to get involved. And how can we support them and motivate them and keep them accountable for making these changes that impact all of us that share the road with them? And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that I've seen.
Yeah, and all the years I've been involved in this, of course, I've come from a family of professional drivers. I have 2 brothers out there today still driving. Happy to say that my one brother just hit the 3 million mile mark. No accident free. So I'm proud of him for that. My other brother is probably a little over 2 million. For me, in working with him all the years, it always came down to one word: accessibility. 3 of us here today, we want to go to a gym or make better food choices or go to our family physician or see someone, get regular checkups. We can do that, right? The life and day of the professional driver, they don't have that kind of accessibility. And I have to tag on to both of your information about engagement. And that's the other thing. How do you get them engaged? And I know all the years talking to fleets and carriers and so forth, they say, well, okay, Bob, we want to do something, but how do you intend to get them engaged? And that's always the challenge, right? The secret. But I found that if you can really get them engaged, especially if you can get with them one-on-one, and I found the best way of doing that is coaches inside a facility to work with them on a regular basis, right? To get that interaction. And you only need one. My goal is to get one poster child. I got that one poster child, and it's very interesting. I'd go in and say, okay, first we want to start doing your screenings, or we're going to do this health program. And they sit there, of course, their hands crossed, they don't want to give her their information, right? And about the time that someone gets 10 pounds down, 15 pounds down, and all of a sudden they want to get in, they want to start telling their blood pressure and what their weight is. I said, no. I don't want you to hear that. I just want you to tell how well you're doing and the success you've had. So now I want to talk a little bit about the research that you really did, talking about diving into the time you spent on doing that and comparing the medical cards length, because once again, in my world of doing this, that I did find we lose so many drivers every year because we don't spend the education time giving them that how to live on the road. Nobody has an idea, right?
Yes, we conducted a study with FMCSA to investigate the relationship between driver medical certification length, the card, and their safety performance. And we did this using the National Registry of Certified Medical Examiner data. We didn't have any driver health information. We just had information about how long they were certified medically. And then we matched that data up with crash and violation data from MCMIS to understand what's the risk here of these different certification lengths or drivers with these different certification lengths. We broke down the analysis by license type, CDL and non-CDL, and age groups. And what we found was overall, the longer the medical examination certification length, the less likely drivers were to have a crash. This finding was strongest for drivers with a CDL, and we observed a higher risk of having a crash for drivers with certification lengths of 3 months or less, 3 to 6 months, and 6 to 12 months, compared to drivers with that 2-year certification length. So not every age group had the same significant findings. The non-CDL group didn't show as strong of a pattern, but generally, drivers with these 2-year certifications were less likely to be involved in a crash compared to drivers drivers with 1 year or less certification lengths.
We know that when you get a 1-year card, right, you've been pre-diagnosed. Blood pressure could be high sugar levels, could be sleep disorders. So would you think that that relates to those drivers being fatigued possibly as a key component?
Yeah, we see fatigue prevalent across a lot of different medical conditions. Sleep apnea comes to mind first and foremost, right? But even just obesity. Obesity is related to fatigue as well. Hypertension can impact fatigue. Just being sedentary all day. We know from our commercial driver safety risk factor study, almost a quarter of drivers aren't getting any exercise at all. Those kind of factors can have impact on fatigue, as well as nutrition. Poor nutrition can make drivers sleepy. And so all of those kind of play into each other.
Right.
And in general, you see the shorter duration for those medical cards means that they have more health conditions of concern for safety.
Yes, no doubt, no doubt. So, this Fit Drivers podcast is sponsored by PrePass, who is really the best provider of way station bypass integrated electronic toll payment services, keeping roads safe and being efficient in trucking. So to hear more about what PrePass does, you can go to prepass.com and understand about that. But they truly believe in road safety, right? And how we can keep our drivers safe. And as I say all the time, you can't be safe if you're not well. Right. So in my career of doing this, I first grew up being a truck driver. And then I realized I came home, told my father it's not for me. And he said, okay, now we got to find out what you do want to do because you have to have a job. So I spent my life career in the health, wellness, healthcare industry around that. And then before I dove back into this piece, what I did, I opened up a small training facility in Ohio and had drivers come back in, one of my brothers being one of them. So what I learned from that was starts out with being overweight, you got blood pressure. And then the next thing comes, if you don't pay attention to that, right, it's cholesterol could set in and it just starts to amp up. And the more it stacks on top of each other, the harder it is, right, to get going. So how many carriers did you reach out to that are involved and were quite willing to talk about what they wanted to do?
We were able to speak with 8 carriers, and that was just in the effort of who we were able to reach and who was able to respond to us within, the study time period that we were working against. But the amount of detail and time during those interviews that we were able to capture information from those carriers was really valuable. We got a lot of good detail about what kind of programs are they putting out there for their drivers, what works, what doesn't work, what are the biggest challenges they face, what are the biggest supports. And we hope that this guide will help other motor carriers who are either thinking about implementing a program for their drivers or have, but it's not going so well. And so what can they do to kind of amp it up and make it more effective and more approachable for drivers to participate in?
Which leads me to talk about, the numbers that I was able to gather from the FMCSA. And pretty much it's, 57% of those CDL holders out there, Alan, operate on a short-term card. And we know what that means, right? That because of health issues, 1 year is right away recognized as hypertensive, pre-diabetic, sleep deprivation. And we just don't do enough in the beginning, like you were talking about. We get them in there, take them through a crash course, and don't really talk about how to live out there on the road and make better choices. So, my question to you is based on your experience and so forth. I'm sure these numbers don't surprise you. Over the years, do you see it getting any better? I mean, do you hear more carriers? Are they trying to be more sympathetic to that, or is it still the same old churn and burn?
You've been a voice for this for many, many years, and you have really pushed companies to start looking at the data. I mean, in the past, nobody knew that half their drivers or over half the drivers didn't have a 2-year card. They didn't even look at that data, just like they didn't look at what percentage of their drivers were female. So it's really creating awareness. But the other thing that I don't think they realize is the ROI. And you've talked about this many times. Do you want to lose a driver, a good, safe driver, because they can't pass their physical? So it's proving the ROI. And for me at Women in Trucking, I had to prove that what women bring to the industry, especially as drivers, the being risk averse and, being good with paperwork and customers and things like that. So they all want to see data. They want to see, how is this going to affect my bottom line? And as over the years, you've gotten more and more of that data, but I still, Bob, I'm sorry, but I still don't see. And I think that this industry still has to realize that maybe the numbers, the retention numbers for drivers with less than a 2-year card, don't make up for the churn? I mean, boy, when I see research, Dr. Stephen Burks did research on it's just easier to hire new drivers than it is to get them home. I mean, think about that. I mean, getting them healthy to me would make more sense. So I think it boils down to, does this industry really care about the person behind that seat or behind the wheel?
Yep, you're exactly right, and which leads me into a great segment, because I'm working with our friends, Carlene, for the next Women in Trucking event. I've got some major healthcare companies, providers, and so forth that I'm working on putting this area together to bring them in, to bring more awareness and do some testing and so forth. And one of the reasons being is that I've learned from being at Women in Trucking, because they are more engaged. And I wanted you to talk about your statistics, your findings about the safety of female drivers, right? The compliancy, like you said, the paperwork, just all the little things that really make up a big difference. So could you speak to that?
Well, first of all, I want to say thanks for coming to the Accelerate conference. I'll see you there this year. But you'll see that female executives, and I think of Joyce Brenny hiring a nurse, her daughter, for their drivers, and Sherry Brumbaugh Garner. Look at her. She has made it her mission to be healthy. So I see a lot of these female CEOs walking the walk, not just talking the talk. So kudos to them. But as far as female drivers, I think women are more in touch with their bodies, but I also think they suffer the same obesity, diabetes, same issues as men. But what I will say is what women bring to the table. And I do have this data. The American Transportation Research Institute found that male commercial drivers were 14% more likely to be involved in a crash than female commercial drivers. And that's because women take fewer risks. We're more risk averse. And it's the amygdala up here that's the fear factor that holds us from taking more risks. And it's more estrogen instead of testosterone. So we're more team oriented and collaborative. But also, and I can't quantify this, but anecdotally, carriers will tell me that typically their female drivers are better with customers, better with paperwork, better with the equipment. And truck driving schools tell me over and over again that female drivers are easier to train. Now, I'm not saying this for everyone,
Right.
And I know that. But I'm just repeating what companies and schools are telling me. And they, so when I started Women in Trucking in 2007, everyone was like, well, we need more drivers. So what can we do to tap into the other half of the population? Now, the biggest change I've seen over the years, and that's because I can bring data, is we see the value women bring to this industry, whether it's in the boardroom as CEOs or in the driver's seat. We see the value of what women bring to the industry. And now we want to learn more about how to attract and retain more female drivers. So that's the biggest change. It's the attitude. And I think, with driver health, you just got to chip away, Bob. They're going to get
Well, I feel like I'm trying to make a dent in that tree, chipping away at it, but it does take a lot of effort. And I know that the same things I'm finding, one particular carrier I did have an experience with that I won't mention the name, but they gave me a handful of their drivers on temporary cards, and I did save out of that population 50% of them and got them to a longer term card from a 90-day that they would have lost. So I thought, well, gosh, they'll really want to be involved in this. And the answer I'm sure I'm going to give you, you're not surprised to hear. Well, Bob, I don't know if I want to spend the money to save them, and then they end up leaving me. And I said, well, that sounds like a whole other set of problems that maybe you should consider looking into, right? I mean, I'm sure you've heard this as well. I mean, there's other issues going on there. If they want to leave you and you help save their livelihood, why would they not want to stay with you unless there's some other circumstances? start with the health side.
Well, of course, retention takes attention. I don't know if there's a greater advocate for driver retention in the industry than me. And you and I can arm wrestle over it, Bob, after this recording. But in terms of the carriers being willing to apply effort, of course, everyone has good intentions. When I used to coach drivers after a safety-related incident, I would say, you didn't wake up this morning saying, I'm going to go hit somebody today, or I'm going to be negligent in my safety practices today. No one gets up and goes to work and says, I'm going to do a half-assed job today. Everyone really wants to apply effort, but we are talking about a boulder, a mountain. We're talking about Mount Everest as it relates to driver health. And so I think it's overwhelming for a lot of folks. And even with an ambassador like yourself, as you well know, we can be deeply ensconced in an organization and have the answer written on the wall. But in terms of like full company buy-in, I'm not sure it's as easy as it sounds. There's probably reasons for that, and maybe we'll get into them throughout the conversation today, but it's much like all of us making New Year's resolutions to diet or, not having health in general be a number one priority all throughout the year rather than just in the month of January. I think that the attention that drivers need for health coming from the company is just such a huge prospect idea that it may just be resistance in terms of how can we even get there. So do I get pushback from clients when I discuss driver health? Of course not. I mean, absolutely. I don't think anyone can disagree, especially since we know that half of our driving professionals are on a less than 2-year card. It's not unknown to folks. It's just what's unknown is what is their relationship to that issue. And then I think you and I would probably argue, what is their responsibility to that issue?
Very good. Very good. That's a great lead in, Leah, that I wanted to ask you when you said, yeah, absolutely, you don't get any pushback, but is there one answer that stands out that they say, for example, I was working with a carrier not too long ago, a big national brand, and they gave me 25 drivers that were on short-term cards, started coaching them. And out of that, I had 3 drivers to be able to go from a 90-day to 1 year and made it. So I assumed after it was over with, the natural progression would be, okay, let's give Bob some more. And the response was, well, Bob, I don't know if I really want to invest in them because I might get them to a 1 or 2 year card and they leave me and go someplace else, which is part of the second part, which you talked about, that you talk about retention in general. I love what I heard you say one time that the recruiting process never ends, right? I mean, it's an ongoing communication with those drivers after you bring them in to keep them enthused. So that being said, is there one particular comment that they make? What's the stone wall? What's stopping them?
I think, as I mentioned, partially is it what can I do and then what should I do might be one component. The other is that there are very few companies that we support that have a full-time Bob Perry on staff. And so, like many other great efforts that passionate trucking leaders have, driver health can be a second responsibility or a back burner responsibility. It's not the primary role and effort of one individual. And quite frankly, you and I would say that's okay. It should be everyone's responsibility, but that's the same as driver retention. Many folks have roles that are VP of safety and recruiting, twofold. VP of recruiting and retention, twofold. And retention, in my humble, not so humble opinion, should be the effort of every individual in the company, because there is just nothing that's going to happen at a trucking company without the professional drivers. So we absolutely all need to be deeply committed to driver retention. And I think the same as it pertains to driver health. It's really everyone needs to be as strongly supportive and in full advocacy of driver health throughout the organization. And that's hard for people. And again, I'm going to keep probably saying this, but think of the entire company, in our country, North America in general, we're in tough shape all around. And so is everyone going to relate that need for health from their own perspective and to their driver's perspective? Are they really going to understand that and be able to carry that flag? I'm not sure. We could all use some support and And the toughest part of this is, as you know, it goes well beyond just that annual 5K or the health fair or the flyer that comes in with your health insurance cards.
Yeah, and no doubt. And hey, listen, I hear you loud and clear that, not everyone's going to have a full-time wellness director or clinic, all those kind of things on staff. But really, a lot of times it isn't all that difficult to do the basic stuff, like even in orientation, give them some basic tips that they can help follow and do. And it's like where I really get going, Leah, is when I read all this information about the technology that they have today, right? They can tell you if that engine's going to blow up on the highway at any time soon and make sure you're not out there and get stuck and all that. But, no big effort to put on helping screen the drivers beforehand. So just simple things like that to give them some education, because one of the things I wanted to ask your opinion about, if you read what the CDC has to say on their site about long haul drivers, and about because of the environment they work on, they're more likely to have health issues because of what they do, the environment, the job requirements, and so forth. So a lot of times, just like in professional sports, they had to come out with new protocols because players want to play and drivers want to drive. So sometimes if you're in an environment that is detrimental to your health, I think that we all, like you say, and have an obligation to protect them from themselves, right? They're going to want to drive, and when maybe they shouldn't drive. And I just, find that interesting that some carriers, simple steps of just providing. I will say though, I'm starting to gain more response from companies to at least take some tips and information they can at least post and put in simple things like when you're doing your pre-trip walk around, right? Why not do your pre-trip refrigerator check and see what's in there, because you're going to get stuck. So your thoughts about that, if we're really doing enough and that we can really do.
Tips and orientation doesn't work for me, Bob. I've been there, done that. That's not enough. You mentioned that I say that recruiting never stops. And I think what you're referring to is the coaching that we provide, that yes, recruiting is a full-time sales and marketing job, but that continues. It has to continue beyond when we have the driver convinced on the job and in the seat in orientation. Then retention takes over, and we have to continuously remind our drivers why they chose us, what they like about us, what their friends like about us, and why they should continue to stay.
Only PrePass provides way station, bypass, and integrated electronic toll payment services. Visit prepass.com for details.